Welcome back. Today we're going to be discussing whether or not the Premier League should institute a salary cap into their league, and would that affect the Premier League positively or would it affect them negatively? What are some pros and cons around it, and why has this concept really come back up and forward? Well, really, this concept's really come back as the Manchester City case is in the courts right now. The 115, the financial fair play breaches. We're still trying to figure out what's happening. There's been wins on one side, wins on the other side, and right now it's really unclear what's going to be happening. However, the one clear thing is, regardless of the result of this court case, the Premier League needs to make a change to the financial fair play rules. Because Man City wouldn't be in this situation right now if there was a salary cap, because they just wouldn't have been allowed to even get to that point. However, there are issues with adding a salary cap as the transfer window. It's an American concept. It breaks tradition. So I'm aware of all of those factors as well. But really, Manchester City right now are fighting a court case where if there was a salary cap, this would have never been an issue. The Premier League are fighting a court case where if there was a salary cap, this would have never been an issue. So whether you think Man City are guilty or not guilty, the only thing that really matters in that case is whether City get relegated at the end of the season because of point deductions and other stuff like that. However, let's start talking about what a salary cap would actually look like. So we can look over at the American sports system right now and really get a gauge of how the salary caps work there. Are they beneficial or are they not beneficial? So we can start looking at the NFL and the NBA, where the salary cap is extremely prevalent. It's a hard cap. There is like flexibility. You can kind of push money down the line, but if you're over the cap, there is like a luxury tax in some cases, but they're hard caps. So you have to pay massive fines if you're over it. If you're over it, there's massive breaches that come in place. So it is a hard cap. And these leagues are really dominating the American sports media right now. They're exploding. The NFL is the most popular TV show on TV in America. They get insane ratings. So Super Bowl, they're charging millions and millions of dollars just for commercials during the Super Bowl. So that is extremely prevalent as well. So you got to be very wary of that. These two sports leagues with salary caps are exploding in America, which obviously offer a great kind of recipe for success for the Premier League to add in a salary cap. However, there are a few drawbacks. Necessarily there's teams that have a lot of money that necessarily feel constrained that they can't spend their money, but it allows for smaller teams to have a fighting chance to go through it, pay equally, and be able to really build a team through that way, through having a salary cap. So that's for a more competitive nature within these leagues. And as a result, you see in the NFL, it's exploding. The average ticket price at a regular team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is an old classic team that has a lot of history, has won some titles before, has wins now, but is not super great now, they can charge $459 a ticket on average. They then sell out their stadium, which is around 66,000 people go to those games. And what's massive here is that equates to $30 million plus per game that they're bringing in. And this is in a salary cap league. So even in a salary cap league, teams can still make a ton of money. It is absolutely brilliant for these teams to be making this money. So that's where it is kind of working. And we see that, again, teams are having to fall in line with this. And we see a lot of competition. Like any team can beat any team. If there is a bad team, they normally can become good pretty quickly. If you look at the Vikings, for an example, they were garbage last year, and now this year they're 5-0. So there are ways that if you're a fan of these like not massive teams or not good teams, that there is a potential for you to become a better team. If you compare that to like the Premier League, for example, if you're a fan of Nottingham Forest, your biggest hope is that you finish mid-table. Like, is that really what you want? Your biggest hope is you might win an FA Cup in your lifetime. Your biggest hope is to not get relegated. If you're a West Ham fan, we were loving being in the Europa League. We were loving being in the Conference League. We wanted to push for Champions League football. That was never going to happen. We just can't spend as much as the Liverpools, the Man Uniteds, the Man Cities, the Spurs, the Arsenals. We just can't spend as much as them. So as a result, it hurts us as fans in watching this. That our biggest hope is we can maybe make a Europa League. We can maybe win the Conference League. We can maybe do all these things, but we can never really hope to win the league or make the Champions League, right? That's a big issue. Then if we're also looking at American sports again, if you look at the MLB that doesn't have a hard salary cap in place, no one watches it anymore. It's been in decline since 2000. It's every year the ratings go down and down and down and down, and tennis goes down and down and down and down on these teams because, again, if you're a fan of, say, the Toronto Blue Jays, or if you're a fan of the Oakland Athletics, if you're a fan of the Miami Marlins, if you're a fan of the Tampa Bay Rays, if you're a fan of these teams that just don't have as much money as the other massive teams in the league, no one goes to those games anymore. Like you can even watch the Tampa Bay Rays don't even sell out for playoff games anymore, even if they're able to make the playoffs, because they just know that the fans just know that they cannot compete against these bigger teams. And that's how really there being no salary cap really affects leagues. As a fan, you just know your team can't do it. And yes, you should have loyalty. I get all of that, right? And you should have real passion for your team. But it's really hard to wake up on a Saturday afternoon and say like, hey, I'm gonna go spend $100, $200, $300 to go watch my team get smoked by another team. It's hard to do that, right? So then as a result, you get less and less attendance, less and less revenue comes in. And we see in the worst cases, the Oakland Athletics, are having to move their team because their owner is just so cheap. They're not getting any people in. He knows he can't outspend these bigger teams. So they're moving the team to Las Vegas in hopes to make more money. And then all those fans in Oakland are just being left behind now. They've got no team to root for anymore because of there being no salary cap, and because these teams know that they cannot compete with the Giants, the Cubs, the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Red Sox, and the Mets in terms of financial aspects. The Mets this year, I think, spent $300 million on their salary cap, and the Athletics spent $60 million on their salary cap. Like, it's not even close. So as a result, this is how it can get really, really bad. And if we look at the Premier League, eventually people in younger generations are going to realize, why would I go to a Crystal Palace game if they're just going to lose to Man City every single time, right? Why would I go to a Crystal Palace game if they're going to lose to Man United? Why would I go to a Crystal Palace game if they're going to lose to Spurs? Why would I go to a Crystal Palace game if they're going to lose to Liverpool every single season? And there's no chance for Crystal Palace to get any better because they're hamstrung by FFP. They can't really put money into the club because then they'll get hurt by it and get points deductions, right? If you look at Everton last season, they nearly got 10 points deducted, and they almost got relegated because of it, because again, of FFP. However, if there was a salary cap in place, this would change a lot of things. And if we just look at the financial records here of, let's say, a Fulham, so a mid-table team, and sorry Fulham fans, but you are a mid-table team, their best hope is to, let's say, finish top 8, I think would be a really good finish for Fulham. And so from the 2022-2023 season, they made $182 million in revenue, which is fantastic. That's all they're going to get, though. They're never going to be able to put more money into that club because of FFP. They're never going to be able to buy better players, get better coaches in, build their facilities up and up and up, because FFP constrains them from doing that. And it constrains them from going into the transfer market. It constrains them from paying players more on free transfers. So all that really leads to them not being able to grow as a club, and it stagnates the league. It allows for big clubs to just dominate the league, and smaller clubs to just kind of hope not to get relegated, or get relegated eventually, then try to come back up and just be in more financial peril. Now, there are drawbacks in case if you have bad ownership, they overspend, they drive the club into debt, and then as a result, the club doesn't exist anymore. But even if you look at bigger clubs like Manchester United, the Glazers have run that team into debt already. They've run the team deeply into debt, and they're a huge club. They've generated so much revenue. For many years, they were the biggest club in the entire world in terms of revenue-making sources. Now look at them. They're in debt. Their stadium's in disrepair. They're having to get financial people coming in to help fix the club financially, and they're a huge club, and that's with FFP already. So FFP doesn't really prevent clubs from doing this anyway. So you might as well just have a salary cap and make the league more even, and have more nuance within the league itself, and not just be like, okay, so start of the season, okay, we're going to have City up top, we're going to have Arsenal up top, we're going to have Liverpool up top. West Ham's going to be mid-table, Fulham's going to be mid-table, Wolves are going to be mid-table. Everton might get relegated, Southampton got relegated, Ipswich is going to get relegated. Like, the league's predictable. Whereas if you look at the NFL, no one could have predicted the Vikings being 5-0 right now. No one could have predicted these teams doing really well, these teams doing really bad. Like, if you look at the 49ers, they're 2-3 right now. No one would have predicted that, right? So as a result, there's nuance in this league, which makes it so much more appetizing to watch. But if it's a Premier League, yes, from week to week, there might be funny results, but by the end of the season, you can kind of just be like, oh, look at the past 3 seasons. That's most likely what it's going to look like. And that's really sad. It's a sad reality for a sport to be in. And again, it's the same with the MLB. It's, look at the past couple seasons. The Yankees are going to be up there. The Dodgers are going to be up there. There might be a cool team like the Milwaukee Brewers get up there, or the Reds get up there from time to time. But other than that, like, it's not really going to happen. And again, the league is just predictable, and it makes it less fun to watch, right? And so if we look at other financial situations, we look at Aston Villa in the 2022-23 season, they made $217 million in revenue, which is brilliant for them. On the typical match day, they would make $2.6 million. That's at a 70-pound average for 38,000 fans. That's brilliant for them. If you times it over a 20-game Premier League season, home games that is, that's $53 million in revenue for them. And that's just fantastic, but that can grow more and more and more. Now, obviously, we want to keep ticket prices relatively low to get more fans into the stadium. I totally understand that, but there is opportunity for growth in this, and having a salary cap league and having more parity would, I think, really allow towards this. Because if you look at this season, for example, and just in terms of the financial aspects of it, in terms of salary caps and sort of salary spending, Manchester City are on top of the league, of course, with £205 million being spent this year, or $268 million, US dollars, that is. We have Aston Villa, who again made the Champions League last season, are only spending £101 million this year. Brighton, who are, again, a really great upstart team, can beat any team, can lose any team, is a really great team. They're only spending $55 million in salary this year. And Ipswich Town, who just got promoted, are only spending £17.7 million in salary this year. It's almost a guaranteed relegation for them at that point. It's just so unfair. And again, a lot of them are constrained because maybe they don't have the money, but that's not the case in Aston Villa. Aston Villa have the money that they could pump into this club to grow the club and to make the team much better and to make it much more enjoyable to watch them. And if they're allowed to spend that money, the league gets better because then there's teams challenging like a Manchester City. You don't need to wait 6 years for Arsenal to build up a youth core to really go up and challenge it. You can challenge them the next season if these teams are allowed to spend this money, right? And so what I would be proposing for a salary cap for the Premier League is I would be proposing a $185 million salary cap spend. So that's what you can spend on your salaries across the league. It could be lower, maybe like $165 million. But if you compare this to other leagues, they'd still be outspending every other league other than Real Madrid and Barcelona. So not even a league, they just would outspend every other league except for those two teams outside of it. Maybe a Bayern Munich might spend more and maybe a PSG might spend more, but other than that, there's no league that could still be able to compete with the Premier League if they have a $185 to $165 million salary cap, which can grow every single season. What this will do is it'll allow Newcastle to spend their money, Manchester United to spend their money, Aston Villa to spend their money, Spurs to spend their money, which they do have a lot of money because that stadium generates a lot of revenue in terms of like selling it to the NFL for games, selling it out for concerts, selling it out for boxing matches. So Spurs will be able to spend their money. Arsenal will be able to spend their money with Stan Kroenke, I think, is the owner there. Plenty of teams could start spending their money to challenge City. And at the end of the season, it will be different every single year because of the salary spent. It will be more competitive. It will be more of a challenge to win the Premier League. Because again, when you're playing the Premier League, if you're challenging for the title, you're going against 1 to 2 other teams. Yes, they're playing every other team, that's great, but you're really only worrying about the point totals of 1 to 2 other teams. For Manchester City, this seems they are only really going to care about Liverpool's point total and Arsenal's point total. Every other team is inconsequential to them because they know they're just going to crush them. There is no parity in that, there's no nuance in that, and that is a huge issue for the league. Then if you look at the transfer window, which is unique to international football, because that's not in the NFL, it's not in the NBA. In the NFL, NBA, transfers or trades are just made, I'll give you this player, you give me this player. And obviously that can't happen in international football because you're dealing with other leagues. You're dealing with players maybe all the way over in Brazil. You're dealing with players all the way in Australia. You're dealing with players in Spain. You can't do this. So that's obviously why you just give money for that, right? Now, if you look at the transfer window, Chelsea since 2023 have spent $700 million in the transfer window. How? And now they're just starting to look good, right? Aston Villa in that same time frame spent $287 million in the transfer window. And again, they could spend a lot more. And Crystal Palace, again, another mid-table team, lower mid-table team, have only spent $145 million in that time frame. How could those two teams compete with Chelsea other than getting miracles, either in the youth development, getting miracles in the transfer market? Like you let's say you just get some kid, let's call him Cameron Lopetegui or whatever, right? And he comes in, he's just this brilliant player beyond for £2 million. He just looks gorgeous, right? And that's what Brighton does, and they do really well at that. But then teams come in and buy their players off of them. However, if there's a salary cap, Chelsea can't swoop in and buy these players off of Brighton for £100 million. They can't swoop in and go and buy players from other teams and ruining, again, the level of the Premier League. Because again, if all these good players are on all these other Premier League teams, it spreads out the talent, which will allow for a more competitive league and not just Manchester City winning it every year, not just Man United for all those years winning it every single year, right? It's really hilarious when you see Man United fans complain about Man City and they crush the league because they could just spend more than everybody for so long, right? Manchester City now crush the league because they can just spend more money than everyone else can, right? And again, there's now issues like with FFP because people are just spending way too much money. So when it comes to the transfer window, I would recommend to have a spending cap on the transfer window, whether that be £250 million per calendar year, £300 million per calendar year, a number that could be worked out that would make it fair for all teams. Whereas, so if you're Manchester City, you can spend this amount to the transfer window. If you're Villa, you can spend the exact same amount as them. And that way it'll become a lot more fair. And again, $300 million or $250 million per team per calendar year, they would still outspend every other league monumentally. And that's completely okay because, again, it makes the most money this league. It gets the most TV ratings this league. It is the highest clicked league in the entire world. So they deserve to have that extra money to be spending. I'm not saying every league needs to put in a salary cap. That's fine. But the Premier League definitely needs to, because they're one of the few leagues right now that are having these issues with FFP, with one of their major teams in their league that is suing them, and they're suing them back. It's ridiculous. And it's all happening because there is no salary cap in the league. So that's why I'm suggesting for the Premier League to put a salary cap in, because if they don't put a salary cap in, the league will fail. But I would love to know what your thoughts are in the comments. Let me know if you think I'm just an absolute idiot here, or let me know if you agree with me, but let me know what you would do to fix the situation that the Premier League is in right now. But like always, have a good one, and I'll see you next time.